And the Lord God formed dinosaurs of the dust of the ground, and breathed into its nostrils the breath of life, and dinosaurs became living beings. But after 165 million years, God grew weary of the sin of his creation. The dinosaurs did not fear God and would not bow to him. So God smote them with the apocalyptic revelation of Apophis. And then he grieved for 65 million years. And then the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And man became a living being. God damn. The Lord God planted a garden eastward at Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord God made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A literal translation of the Hebrew creation myth is completely acceptable today. Up to about 5th grade Sunday school. Beyond that, if anybody wants to be taken seriously, they need to find some kind of a metaphorical reason for that story to make some sort of personal, spiritual sense. But I know the secrets that Moses nested in there. Interested? Well, let's get started. Hi everyone, I'm Daniel. Welcome to Just One Truth. In this episode, we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about the Hebrew creation story. This might possibly be the most well-known creation story in the world, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. As we do this, what we're going to be doing is building off of everything that we've covered so far in episodes 1, 2, and 3. We're going to use all the techniques that we have talked about so far and apply the same ones to this. We're not going to do anything different. We're going to look at the story and see that it unfolds in the same personal way. We're going to make it about us, and we're going to tie ourselves metaphorically to elements in the story. Before we do that, I want to talk about something else. That stories like this contain incredible amounts of superfluous details. Before we talk about Adam and Eve, let's take another example. This is one we've been using all along. We're going to go back to Aesop's fable and the story of the tortoise and the hare again. Again, we already know going into this story that there's a lesson, slow and steady that wins the race. And we know that it's a fable, so we know that it is meant to be a metaphor, that it's allegorical, that there's a lesson contained within, that it isn't historically accurate. So the story contains elements that are carrier elements. They are the parts of the story that make it engaging, mentally fun, interesting, something that people laugh and goof around about, and they'll pass this story along because it is a fun story. We have a talking tortoise and a talking hare. And even though the fox didn't say anything, there's a fox in this story that's told to set up the race and to determine who the winner was. If, for any reason, this story was written as a religion, if there were Aesopists, I don't know, if there were people who believed in Aesop as God, and that this was a literal story, what would they have to do? They would have to believe that it's true. They would have to call it a miracle. Later on, as people argued against them and said, no, that can't be possible, they would be looking for archaeological evidence, finding this straight piece of ground that got dug up under the sand that people would say, look, here's the race course. And there's a depression along the way. This is obviously where the nap was taken. They would find foxes and determine the lineage of the foxes. It would be incumbent upon them to prove the details of the story. Again, what we really know is that those details are added in to create the story, to create the fun part. If you told people, please pass along to everyone this lesson. It's slow and steady that wins the race. Your lesson would go no place. It wouldn't make it along the first camel train, past the first well. But a story about a race between a tortoise and a hare with a fox mediating, oh yeah, that's going. So your lesson is embedded, it's contained, it's nested inside of a fun story, and it enjoys the widest possible dissemination. Religious stories are constructed in the exact same way, and in fact in this Hebrew creation story, we see a talking serpent. Later on in the Bible, there's a talking donkey. But there are superfluous details. There's a lot of elements to the story that if somebody believes that it is historically accurate, it is incumbent upon them to prove all of those details. They have to find the Garden of Eden. They've got to find the pile of dirt that God formed Adam from. They need to determine what fruit there was, who this snake was. All of these details that may or may not have a purpose to this story, in all reality, are just the icing. They're the carrier. People who believe the story is true and accurate and historical, they don't have access to what is inside the story. They are the carriers of the story. They are the ones that ensure it gets the widest possible dissemination so that whatever is inside of the story is there so that it gets spread around. It doesn't get lost. It doesn't get left behind. Like the lesson, it's slow and steady that wins the race. There's a spiritual lesson contained in this story. Now, I don't have to say this to the Jews, the people whose story it originated with. It's their story. It's their God. They will tell you, this is allegorical. This is not historical. It's only later on that people grabbed onto the story, not understanding things, not applying processes, that decided, no, this is a historically accurate story. There's a lot of Christians today that realize, no, we know it's not. We know that that's not true. But I think we all know people who say, yes, it is true. And if you don't believe it, you are fooled. You're a sinner. What can you do there? I can understand how a child would believe that. They don't know anything different. They're being wired fresh from an empty brain. But as you grow, as you learn, as you experience the world, as you begin to develop experiences that you can weigh against that knowledge, what surprises me is that into adulthood, people still say, that's a true story, and anybody that is coming up with something different are liars or they're fooled by the devil or something. It's kind of crazy. Anyway, I don't mean to go there. What I want to say is we're going to get to the nested layer. What we're going to do going into this is understand that there are a lot of superfluous details in this story as well. We're not going to look at the historicity of things. We're going to look at metaphoric relationships between elements in the story and the human life, our individual human life. In a nutshell, the basics of the story of Adam and Eve is that God created man from the soil of the earth, and that man lived in this place called the Garden of Eden, this place where everything was fine, it was blissful, and man was naked. But that as time went by, man was lonely, and so God saw fit to give him a mate, and then pulled a rib out of man and created woman from the man. And that the two of them lived together in the garden, naked, enjoying life. Everything was okay. But then the woman, who is off on her own, becomes tempted by a serpent to eat of this tree that is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that the woman Eve, enticed by this idea, does partake of something that she's not supposed to partake of. She's been told, don't do that, leave it alone. She does anyway. And then goes back to Adam, bringing some of this fruit, whatever it is, with her, and gets him to eat of it as well. And once they do that, they both became aware of their nakedness. So now, after consuming a certain something that provides knowledge and awareness, they feel shame. They've had this experience. And so what do? They put garments on themselves. They cover themselves with vegetation. God looks for them and sees that they're hiding. And he kicks them out of this blissful location, this Garden of Eden. And they're sent to go off and suffer in the land. Not long after they leave, they have offspring. 2 boys, Cain and Abel. One is evil, one is good. And the evil destroys the good. These really shouldn't be metaphoric elements that are even difficult to see. To call them factual or historical reality makes you the carrier of the story, not the one who sees inside. We're going to back up just a little bit. We're going to make this story about ourselves, and who and what we are as human beings are elements of this story. Every bit of this story is about us as an individual. I am Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. You are Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. How does that work? What is the Garden of Eden? I submit that the way this unfolds is that the Garden of Eden, like Buddha's Nirvana, like when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven within, that these are not physical locations. These are states of being. These are locations in your mind. They're not locations on the planet. They're locations within your soul. A state of being. Adam, when he's first created, is representative of us when we are born. We are infants. We live in the Garden of Eden. We are infants. We are only conscious. We really don't know much of anything, but we're very blissful and happy. We have not taken on sin and pain and hurt. We live in this place. But as we grow and as we develop, our subconscious begins to develop. As we learn and as we take on experiences, Eve emerges. And Eve is representative of our subconscious mind, while Adam is representative of our consciousness. The consciousness is in charge. Everybody's consciousness, refer to it as Adam. Don't look at this as man and woman, male and female. Look at it as 2 parts of yourself, 2 parts that go together, conscious and subconscious, and that they often work against each other. As we grow and develop, and as our Eve portions emerge, as our subconscious develops, we're still happy and blissful. But as life goes on, we are tempted by things in life. Many hurtful things. Think of your own. If this doesn't ring with you, sorry. If this rings with you, you know what it is. You know what kind of pain or shame or suffering, anger, hatred, whatever you harbor from your childhood. That is what has tempted you. And the serpent is representative of being tied to the ground, the physical, the world. This can never rise above anything. The serpent represents the physical connection to things. The physical world, non-spiritual. And when you have experiences, whether they're going out and being molested or molesting or lying, cheating, stealing, or being lied, cheated, and stole against. We have experiences, many people have experiences that are very hurtful. Not everybody does. So this isn't going to make sense to you. As that happens and we emerge, we begin to clothe ourselves because we feel bad about it. We feel angry. We feel shame. We feel hurt. The garments that we put on are denial or accusation. They're things that we put on other people. Think of this. Think of how many times in our media in the last 20 years, generally when legislation is being made, for example, to give the same rights to gay people as non-gay people have. And much of the world is like, yeah, that's fine. But there's a very vocal element of people who make it on the news and for religious reasons talk about that being sinful. They're hateful about it. They are very angry. They say all manner of bad things about gay people. Why is that? The anti-gay feelings from a Christian comes from the book of Leviticus, which is an early book where a verse says, "Man shall not lie with man." There's actually a bunch of rules that are listed there. They'd have to be looked at separately on their own. But we have rules like, you will not eat shellfish. A deformed man cannot come to the altar and leave a gift or an offering to God. That on your wedding night, if you find out that your wife is not a virgin, you're supposed to take her to her father's doorstep and stone her to death on his doorstep. And man shall not lie with man. This group of verses all coexist together. Does anybody make noise about the other ones? No. Why is it that people are so against the gay? Humans are animals. Watch monkeys or kids growing up, and you'll see they play with each other. Doesn't matter if they're boys or girls or whatever. In some circles, that's, okay, kids, stop experimenting. I don't care. It doesn't hurt me. But sometimes it hurts them. When somebody is screaming and yelling hateful things against the freedom and the rights of homosexuals, why do you think that is? They're showing us their garments. They're showing us their shame. They're showing us their judgment. That's how this works. Jesus uses different verbiage when he says we're known by our fruits. Everything you express outwardly is because of what is inside of you. Anyway, in a nutshell, this is how the story of Adam and Eve is about the story of the beginnings of each human. And not everybody partakes of the fruit. Not everybody gets kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Not everybody gets sent away from this place of mental bliss and happiness. People then begin to live their lives with fear, shame, anger. They see media, they hear things, they talk against it, they yell at people, they flip each other off. All manner of things begin to happen that weren't there at childhood. They emerged as people have experiences. As they partake of the knowledge of good and evil, they become those things and they clothe themselves. And you lose access to that place of bliss. And then you have offspring. Elements of you that are good and bad. Oh, I shouldn't do that. It's not a good thing. But then you react and you do it anyway. You've got your good parts and your bad parts fighting against each other because consciously you know one thing, but subconsciously you are harboring a fear and a pain and a shame that lives inside of you in conflict with the other parts of your thinking, the other parts of your knowledge. And in this conflict, we act out, and oftentimes people will shift from one place to another, act out and then feel sorry, and then act out and then feel sorry. These are those two elements fighting against each other. And they fight against each other because you keep the bad one tucked away. You keep it hidden away. We start to become what's a later story, the man of the tombs. And the bad part in the story of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel overcomes the good part. The bad wins. The rest of Moses' stories are how to find these things, how to escape, how to go spend 40 years in the desert. Moses even wrote a metaphor for these stories. And I've referred to it a couple of times. I've been throwing little nuggets out there. The story of the Ark of the Covenant. In this story of the Ark of the Covenant, it's about a golden chest that is carried by the masses who don't have access to the inside of it. But they carry it everywhere, and once in a while people get access to it. So what I'm suggesting and offering here is that utilizing the same processes, the same keys, turning it inward, seeing that there's layers, making it about us, applying ourselves and our physical lives to elements of the story, realizing that it's full of superfluous details, and that there is knowledge and understanding nested at a deep layer that doesn't have to do with a lot of little bits and pieces and parts. It's a bigger piece. It's more encompassing, but people get lost in the details. That the story of Adam and Eve is the story of the beginning of each human being. Every one of us is Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. And the rest of the stories from Moses are how to get back to a point, how to find this place. You know that the Holy Land is also a metaphor for a state of being. That'll have to come up ahead. Nirvana, the kingdom of heaven within, the Garden of Eden, the Holy Land. These are all metaphors for a peaceful state of being. But people like to look at them and think of them as physical locations and live their entire lives trying to prove that the tortoise and the hare really had a race. With that being summed up, I want to take you back outside, back out to the desert. I'm going to tell you some more about me, and I want you to know that these desert trips, they're there for a reason. They're symbolic. The Jewish people, the Hebrew people, spent 40 years in the desert. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert. They're not the only people under Abrahamic traditions that spent 40 days, nights, years doing something. 40 is generally considered by Jewish scholars to mean to the time of enlightenment, or until the time something is completed, until something has played out, until it's finished. When I use the term 40 years, it is symbolic of this path of getting to a point where you awaken and realize, oh, this is about me. From that point till the time you get to where you have stripped all of your garments off, or you've gotten rid of all of your demons, when you have found again the promised land or the kingdom of heaven within. So when we go to the desert, it's symbolic of that path. And I'm telling you about me when we're out there. That's where I'm stripping off my garments and destroying my demons. So there's more to it than just heading outside. All right, let's go. All right, we're in Doc Hysam's place. We're waiting on him to come back. It'd be a long wait. Doc hadn't been here in over 100 years. He lived down here by the river. One of the things that's on his plaque out at the trailhead that says, one of the things Doc said was that he never took the paper because he didn't want anything to influence his thinking, his mind, his judgment. You know, I'm mind-boggled that as long ago as that was, 100 years ago, that they had the same problems then as we have today. People get wrapped up in media. They consume it and they become it. And whatever flavor you watch, you become more and more that way. And the news media feeds you what they want to feed you, and you sit and you eat it, and you become spokesperson for somebody. We need to be like Doc Hysam. Turn off the TV. Anyway, you know what? It's a breezy day. It's cool. It's beautiful out. It was snowing a little bit earlier, but it was a good place to duck in out of the wind, so I got set up in here. Okay, so I'm going to jump right into telling you about what happened after Larry died. That's the next part of the story. I was 9 years old. Remember the last episode, number 3. And I felt like Larry abandoned me. He was gone. He left me in an abusive situation. I had 3 younger brothers, but we were separated. They were not. It was different. I felt very much alone. And for the next couple of months, of course, all of the whippings quit. Mom backed off into her corner. I was depressed. I didn't know what to do. Nobody ever talked to me. I just had to deal with Larry was gone. He died, and that I cut him out of the tree. It was horrific. For a kid that age, for anybody, it wouldn't be okay for anyone. It's not okay. Anyway, sometime later on that year, 3-4 months or so, everything began to have some semblance of normalcy returning, and the whippings began again. And in a very short period of time, they had come back with a vengeance, unlike anything that there was previously. And I was getting at an age, and I was having experiences, and after losing Larry and having Jesus and God not help, I was becoming like this belligerent little, I don't care. I was like, this wasn't working for me. I was tired of being treated the way that I was, like less than human, like a stupid kid that's never going to amount to anything. And you just get tired of that after a while. You either take it and you become that, or you fight against it. Well, I was a little kid. I fought against it, but I lost. One time my mom was just laying into me, and she said something to the effect of, "You kids are going to get it. God has punished me for letting you get away with so much." And of course, I never asked her in life what that meant, and I'm sure she doesn't remember or didn't remember, but it's stuck in my head because the instant that she said that to me as she was whipping me, I thought that what she was saying is that the reason Larry hung himself and was gone was because she was not strict enough with us. And I was beginning to turn the corner on this idea that Jesus and God are real, or that they were on our side. It was like, okay, if there is a Jesus and a God, they're not good people. They don't care about little kids. They don't care about my plight. And when people are using God and Jesus and they're hurting you that way, God and Jesus doesn't look too good. And when you pour your heart and soul out, begging, crying, pleading for help to God and Jesus, and nobody shows up, what do you think starts happening? You kind of quit looking for that after a while. Well, anyway, the years go by. I started becoming a target for getting bullied in school. It was natural. I hit a growth spurt. I was a tall, skinny kid, 6 feet tall at the end of 8th grade and skinny as a beanpole. I was limping all the time. I had such bad growth pains. It was I stretched out quite incredibly, but I was not developed. I was skinny. I was a beanpole, and it made me a fun target for bullies because I was tall and I was a pussy, and they let me know it. And they beat me a lot, and I would do just like at home, curl up on the ground and cry, you know. So that's what was happening there. And something happened at home. At first I got in trouble for getting in fights, coming home with your clothes tore, all messed up, black eyes, fat lip. And Mom would yell at me for tearing up my clothes. And this happened maybe 2 or 3 times, and I yelled at her once, "I'm not tearing up my clothes, I'm not fighting, I'm getting beat. I'm getting picked on." And she kind of backed away a little bit. She didn't say anything, but I remember that moment. That was kind of like this growth and development part. And it happened frequently enough, and the beatings happened frequently enough that sometimes the two overlapped. And I noticed that when Mom blew up and started going into her rages, she went after the 3 younger boys and left me alone if I was all beat up. And so that almost, I felt like I was a smart kid. So what did I do? Well, you could tell when Mom was getting ready to blow. We had been through this enough times that you could see the process. You could see the procedure. You knew when she was getting ready to pull out the belt and have one of her fits and fly off the handle, and her demon was going to come out. And I would go into the bathroom and I would start punching myself. I would beat myself. I would give myself black eyes and fat lips. I would scrape myself. I began at the same age cutting myself. I began taking knives and razor blades and cutting my arms and my chest and my stomach. And I don't know why that cutting occurred, although I found out later that it was something that kind of happens. It's a very self-destructive behavior from people who are very abused. Anyway, it still hurt. It didn't hurt. I mean, it didn't feel good to beat yourself, give yourself black eyes. But I had control over it. Mom didn't beat me. I got to do it. It was like the first time I was learning that I could do something. And think of that. Think of how crazy that is, how insane that is. I got control over my mom by beating myself up so that she won't do it. It's kind of broken, but the mind works like that. Processes work that way. Anyway, that went on through my teenage years, my young teenage years, and up a little older. I remember one time getting a really incredible beating, a whipping. And up in Maple Valley outside of Seattle, it rained a lot. And I remember after that whipping going outside, and I didn't have a coat on. It was raining like crazy. And when you get a whipping like that, it stings very violently at every impact. After all of that is done, within, 5 to 10 minutes, all of that stinging has abated, and what you feel is just incredible heat, like burns. They feel like your skin is very hot. And I remember standing out in the rain with the rain coming down, and I can remember feeling very hot, and I can remember looking up into the sky at God. Can you see what I'm doing with my hands? I've got them out of frame on purpose. And I felt like, if you're there, then take me. Stop this. This is not okay. I dare you. Then you stand there waiting for the lightning to strike or something to happen or a heart attack to come on, and like all the other times, nothing happens. I think that was probably the time that I really had it in my head, there's no God. There's nobody on my side. If there is, this God plays favorites. Well, I was getting to a point where I hit puberty. I was starting to get in fights in school that were violent fights, and I was beginning to become my mom. You know, before you would get picked on, like maybe you're holding your books in your hand and walking down the class and somebody would come up behind you and flip them from behind so they would scatter out all over the floor and stuff would go everywhere and you're scrambling and picking it up and people are laughing at you and standing around and calling you names as you're a little kid. As you get older, it gets a little bit more violent than that. Pussy Paulson was my name. And but there's a point where something snapped inside of me, and you know what? I started fighting back. It was after puberty, it was after a few impacts, and I was not strong. I would get resoundingly beat, but I didn't care. I didn't lay on the ground curled up anymore. I started fighting back, and I would go crazy, and I'd be picking up garbage cans, chairs, anything, and start flinging it. I went crazy. Out of control, completely out of control. And pretty soon, at the slightest little provocation, I was doing that. And I realized now, I was becoming my mom. I was taking on her demons. She planted the offspring of her demons in me, and they were now being born and growing. Now, I'll get back to that story next time. That's enough of it for now. I want to say something else. I've mentioned a couple of times that there's always been something there, that I knew that there was something bigger than me. And this idea initially that it was God quickly waned. Here's the experience. It's the day that Larry hung himself. Before I went outside, and I was sneaking outside, and I knew I would get in trouble if I got caught. So I'm being very stealthy, going to the back door. I slipped on my rubber boots. I pull on my jacket, and as my hand is coming out the sleeve, I'm simultaneously just inches away from the doorknob. And it felt like a physical hand on the palm of my head, like something touched me. Nothing was there. It was just a sensation. And two words occurred in my head that were so matter of fact, it was like the sky is blue, or 2 + 2 is 4. It was just as clear as anything. There was no question about it. It occurred in my mind in this incredibly matter of fact process. And the words were, Larry's dead. And within a couple of microseconds, I shook that off. It was like, oh, that's crazy. I dismissed that thought, we put back in motion, and it was within 2 minutes that I found Larry after he had hanged himself. What was that? What was that was outside of the 5 senses, but that told me something? I talked to people about it later. I talked to my Sunday school teacher about it, who said, oh, that's God talking to you. And I thought, well, I don't buy that, because God, why would God talk to me? And the Sunday school teacher told me that was God warning you that what you're about to find. And it's like, why didn't God step in and help us when we needed help? That wasn't very helpful. If that was God saying that, that didn't do anything. I didn't think there was anything to it. And a lot of people over the years tell you what they think it is. Oh, here's what happened to you. But all along, I think, I don't know what that was. But I think it's natural. I think it's normal. And I think it happens sometimes to people under incredible emotional duress. Anyway, that was only the first of a number of magical things in my life that was to show me that there's something beyond the 5 senses. I don't know what that was that day. Even the idea where someone once told me it was Larry's spirit talking to you, it was in third person. It wasn't Larry addressing me. Larry never approached me and talked about himself in the third person. No, it wasn't Larry. Larry, I realize now, was gone before I ever got there. I didn't know that then. I thought for a long time I did something wrong and I couldn't help him. But I know that that's not the case now. And I know that he was dead. And anyway, well, that's it for this trip. Let's head on back. It's time to wrap this one up. I gotta do something before I do. I gotta let my mom off the hook. I've really painted an accurate picture without getting into a lot of details, quite honestly, up to this point. And the reason for that is so that the viewers who this teaching is for, so you can connect with me, so you can say, oh, I get it, yeah. And it's been very important for me to let you know that I come from a place of hurt, a level of hurt that if you can connect with it, that there's something potentially valid to my experience and to what I've learned, because I've changed my life as a result. But I wanted you to know what it was like to begin with. When you grow up in a place like that, in a way like that, you start out, like we've been covering all along here, empty. You become wired to be that experience. You become a product of that upbringing. You turn around and do the same thing. You don't get normal people in society out of environments like that. They don't make it on their own. They weren't given the tools as a youngster to function correctly. You hope later on that you can get those tools before you end up in jail or worse. Before you've destroyed your life or the lives of others around you or other people. The most significant part of this healing process is to understand that your brain is an electrochemical storage device, and it holds the memory of what happened as well as the emotional state, or at least when you remember what happened, those emotions emerge as well. It's very hurtful. It's very painful. You experience it over and over again throughout your life, even though you've left it behind, as long as it is left in storage in that manner. When you ignore it, when you don't deal with it, when you hate it, when you're angry about it, it haunts you. It becomes your skeletons in the closet. It becomes the demons that haunt you. And they're not out there in space. They're not demons and devils beyond you. They're demons and devils inside of you. And you can never rid the skeletons in your closet, but you got to make friends with them. And ultimately what that means is forgiveness. There's a good reason for forgiveness. I remember hearing that early on and thinking, no, that is unforgivable. What happened is something I will never forgive. I didn't ask for that. I can remember many years going through processes just like that. Until I got to a point that I realized my life experiences are unfolding because of what I'm holding up here. And the forgiveness isn't about the other person anymore. It's about me. It's about my life. It's about what I hold inside of me. And when I hold that kind of anger and that hatred, it continues to come out because it's a part of me. And the only way I can make it stop coming out and stop hurting the people around me is to make sure that it doesn't exist inside of me in that way anymore. One of the things that helped me forgive my mom was understanding this exact same process and realizing, wait a minute, if she didn't have me just to hurt me, if this happened because she didn't know any better, because she got hurt, and before her got hurt, people got whipped and people got abused and people got told things, but along the way, they never figured it out. They tucked it away. Their monsters were left intact, and when they had kids, they passed those monsters along, who then had kids and passed those monsters along. You get the idea. At some point, I could step back and I realized I wasn't a victim. I was just the next link in the chain. And I was lucky because I got to see that. I got to figure that out, and I got to step out of it if I had the courage to face the monsters that I carried inside. As the years went by, my mom and I became much closer. Not close. But we could talk. Everything was okay. And I loved her, but we could never, hug and kiss and that sort of thing. It just wasn't established at a young age. Those days were gone. But as she got much older, as she was beginning to lose things in life, my dad had passed along. She was not prepared for that. She came apart. I tried to talk with her about her life and what had happened, and she confided some things in me. And a lot of it had to do with her being abused and admitting that, yes, she was whipped and that she was molested and that she did those same things, and she cried and bawled and said, "I'm so sorry, I don't know why." And I know why. Because she couldn't get a hold of him, but it was too late for her. She couldn't, and I felt, my God, incredible compassion that she had to store that away and that she had to carry it with her and that she could never resolve it. She couldn't get through those walls. They were too big, too thick, and they'd been there for too long. Well, I talked to my mom about this, and I told her, I want to tell this story. We were sitting out at the cemetery. We'd gone out to visit Larry. We spent the afternoon out there, went and sat on a bench and just talked, just her and me. And I asked her, would it hurt you if I told this story? Because I didn't want to hurt her. I knew at some point in time she was not a perpetrator. She was just a victim. And I didn't see any reason to hurt her. But I saw a reason to tell this story to help other people. And she said, yeah, I agree. And she cried and she said, yes, tell the story. So I want you to know as I'm doing this, I don't want you to hate my mom. I remember years ago talking to somebody about this and getting to a point where I was having the same kind of a discussion with him, and he angrily got in my face and was like very close to me and sticking his finger out and saying, "You never forgive somebody like that after what she did." And I thought to myself, this isn't about me or my mom. This is about you and your mom. And I know that that's exactly what happens. If you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, I hate that person for doing that, well, you need to look at your things, not my things. I'm okay. We got it fixed before it got too late. Between us, we figured it out. She could never figure out her part, but I could figure out mine. And in the end, she was a frail old woman that could scarcely remember who I was. That's what happens to us in life. And she had so many shells up, so many walls that were impenetrable. She became like a simple child. Well, anyway. All right, I wanted to say that about my mom. There's still some stories coming up. The next story that I tell still has to do with my mom. But I don't want to continue carrying this on where I'm creating this image of her being this monster. I'm telling you about the life experience that I had when I was a child, but it didn't stay my life experience. And all of those stories are going to come out too. Okay, now to summarize the creation story. Adam is each and every human being as they're born. When you're an infant, you are the Adam character, and you are in the Garden of Eden. You're in a blissful place. As you grow and develop, Eve emerges from you. Eve is the subconscious that comes from your mind. Like in the story where Eve is created from the rib of man, in life, the subconscious is created from the mind of man. It comes from your experiences and your perceptions. Oftentimes, these experiences and perceptions are bad and they're hurtful. And when the subconscious picks them up, they affect the conscious. So both the conscious and the subconscious, Adam and Eve, are kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They are no longer experiencing bliss. They go off and they have life experiences. And these life experiences are metaphorically your offspring. These are what you produce through your life. These are what come out as a result of the combination of your conscious and your subconscious mind. These experiences represented metaphorically by Cain and Abel, good and bad. And in this case, in Moses' story of Genesis, where we are at this point, evil wins. Evil wins out over the good. Then the stories continue on from there through Genesis. It's not the end of the story. The creation story is not a standalone story. It's the first step in a process that is something that you would find outlined by the Buddha, with multiple stages of going through experiences to get back to this place of, well, Buddha called it Nirvana. Jesus called it the kingdom of heaven within. In Moses' story, they left the Garden of Eden, but they're looking for the promised land. These are all metaphoric parallels for getting back to that blissful place and that blissful state. Okay, I need to wrap this up. So I'm thinking that in the next episode, I should probably kind of summarize the rest of Genesis, go through the rest of Moses' stories to show how he's creating this story of a path that isn't about a people. It's about a person. It looks like it's about a people, but along the way, there's all these magical and mystical things happening that don't make any sense. The Hebrews, the Jews will tell you it's allegorical or metaphor. Figure it out. To me, it goes from miracle and waiting on God to do something to, oh, this is about me and my life. We don't have to go in this kind of detail now that we've seen the process, now that I've laid out the keys and we see how we tie ourselves to the story. That process will just repetitively continue, and it'll get simpler and easier as we move along. So until next time, be safe, look inward, and remember there's just one truth, and we are getting to it.